Welcome to Telegeography Explains the Internet, the show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and my guest today is Mattias Fridström, Vice President and Chief Evangelist at Arelion. As you will hear in the start of our interview, Mattias has been at Telia, now Arelion, for a long time, in fact, from its inception. And from that seat of being at a Tier 1 provider, he's gotten this great view of the telecom industry over the past couple of decades. So he uses that broad perspective to write a forward-looking article each year on the trends that he expects to see in the industry in the coming year. So I thought it would be fun to look back at his predictions for 2022 from 1 year ago and see how they played out. We start with his top 3 global carrier trends, where he goes through his predictions about network security, greater utilization of the public internet, and disaggregated network sourcing and engineering. And we get into many other key issues that arose in 2022, such as skills gaps, cost increases and shortages like chipmaggedon, and global issues outside the telecom industry, like the Ukraine war and the resulting European power crisis, and how providers and industry players reacted to these forces. And we can't talk about his predictions for 2022 without getting into how those and other issues might play out in this year, giving us a preview of his new article that will be coming out probably around the time this episode is released in Subtel form again. So Mattias has a deep knowledge and history of the global telecom ecosystem and is really adept at discussing them. So without further ado, let's turn it over to the interview. Okay, welcome to the show, Mattias.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, you have this chief evangelist kind of title. I love that. I've talked to a few people on the show that have that. So, could you just take us through your role, though, first at Telia, then becoming Arelion, and of course, and how you got to be a chief evangelist, what your sort of background is briefly, and for anyone listening, that might not be. I think almost everyone listening to the show is familiar with Telia / Arelion now, right? A little background on what you guys do.
Yeah, no, I was actually here when we started the company in 1998. That was a point in time when half circuits went into full circuits and companies starting to build their own networks in other countries. And we were one of the pioneering companies saying, why can't we do that? Let's do that. Mm-hmm. So we started building a network both in Europe and North America. And that kind of propelled us into becoming an international carrier. I've had many roles in this company. I've been the CTO for many, many years. But then in 2016, I felt, okay, I've been the CTO now for so many years. And the only thing you do is kind of build more and repair more. And I felt, someone new needs to come in here with new energy, continuing the repairing stuff and the building stuff, because that's what it's all about in some way. And then we kind of had a discussion here. We don't really have anyone in the management team that have time to spend on what is the world going through right now, what's happening in the world, what is everyone else doing, what are the competitors doing, what are the customers doing, trying to figure out, what's going around and what do we need to do to be better and what is everyone else doing to become better. So I kind of said, I can take that role. I'll become the chief evangelist. That means I have time to spend with customers, not asking them to buy more, but just trying to figure out where they want to go. And I can also then relate all of that back to what we do and help the people who's always in the hamster wheel trying to do the stuff they're supposed to do. I can tell them, hey, everyone else is doing this. We're doing that. Maybe we should look at what they're doing. Or the other way around, hey, here we're doing something that no one else is doing. This is really cool. Yet, let's stay here. Let's do that. Continue to do that. So my job is really, number 10 in the midfield. I can really be anywhere. Practically trying to figure out what we need to do next.
Yeah, well, and there's an interesting dynamic there too, right? Because for you guys, as for most carriers out there, there's two very different sets of customers with different ideas. Your wholesale customers, your enterprise customers, and they're in very different places sometimes. And I think getting those groups to harmonize, right, is a challenge, is it not? Right.
Absolutely, and traditionally we've really been selling well to wholesalers and carriers. And it wasn't really
Hmm.
until 2018 that we said, hey, why not start to sell to enterprise as well? So I think we're still in the learning curve of trying to figure out how to sell direct to an enterprise. Before,
Hmm.
we sold to Verizon and AT&T and they sold to the enterprise. Now we go
Right.
direct with some of our services. And that's a bit of a change in attitude and a change in the way we sell. Sometimes in the wholesale world you can get contacted by a customer on the Monday and you sell by the Friday.
Hmm.
In the enterprise world, there's typically a 6 to 9 month cycle before
Absolutely.
your sort of first interaction and when you start to do business. So I think we're all learning in Arelion, trying to figure out, how do we approach the enterprise world?
Hmm.
And as you said, they are very different. They are absolutely different.
Right. Although in some ways converging more than they used to is something we might even hit on here, that with raw internet as an enterprise technology now, and I even talked to some enterprises who are building their own backbones between data centers and stuff. So there is some convergence of those worlds going on, I think. So,
No, absolutely. You're completely right. And some of them are kind of more sophisticated buyer than some of our
mhm.
operator customers. They
Yeah.
realize that they need competence in that area as well. And some network engineers and enterprises are as good as the network engineers we have. So you're absolutely
Right.
right. They're starting to get closer to what we normally do and sell.
Yeah, excellent. All right, so on to our main topic here today, Matthias. I read your article in the Subtel forum last year on the a bunch of series of top three trends that you were looking out for in 2022, kind of predictions. And I think with predictions, as someone in my role who sometimes has to make predictions, it's always kind of fun to go back and see how well you did. Predicting the future is hard, with that caveat
Yeah.
in mind, right? In fact, I think there's a quote in your article that I really like, that you can't predict the future, but you can be ready for it. Something
Yep.
like that. You can correct me, but yeah. So I thought let's go back through your Subtel forum article from the start of 2022, and those things that you highlighted that you were going to sort of follow this year, and see how they went.
Yep.
And in mind, let me ask. I assume you're writing this article again for 2023.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's going to be released any day now, I believe.
Excellent. All right, so we can tie that in maybe with what you see coming in 2022. But I wanted to just start with your top three global carrier trends.
Yep.
I, the origin of this show was really originally about WAN specifically. Now we're talking about all things telecom, but
Yep.
even still, SASE security is something that people want to talk about all the time. That
Yep.
that was the start of your article. Security increasingly important. What did you have to say in 2022, and how do you think it shook
Yeah, no,
out?
absolutely. And the thinking I had when I wrote that was that I felt, there's a lot more network security that we need to implement. DDoS, we
Hmm.
need to be better DDoS protection, firewalls, everything around security is going to be increasingly important for 2022. When I look back at 22 to see what happened, absolutely DDoS is important. It is really important to stop that. And I actually can see that we have stopped that. I would argue that during the fall of 2022, the number of DDoS attacks in the world are actually less than they were in the spring.
Hmm.
I think that's
Interesting.
from a
Yeah.
combination of some of the larger operators are starting to share more data between them and start to sort of help each other fighting against these things. And then
Mm-hmm.
obviously sophisticated tools to stop this already before they happen. So there's a lot of things in there. But what I didn't understand when I wrote that was that there was going to be a war in Europe and there's going to be a lot more things happening in the network, even sabotage in the network. We've never really seen that
Hmm.
before. But during
Right.
2022, we had two incidents in France where cables were cut by
Hmm.
someone who just wanted to cut them. So
Right.
I would say, I spoke about network security, I wrote about network security, but actually now physical security is what most
Hmm.
customers are talking about. I
Hmm.
don't know how many times I've shown customers maps of where we have our cables and how vulnerable C cables are, and how fast we can repair a LAN cable and that stuff. So I think security is absolutely more important, but not in the way I thought before 2022. But it's still
Hmm.
super relevant.
Yeah, absolutely, and I like the way that there are new tools emerging both on the carrier side and for enterprises to adopt directly and that sort of thing. but yeah, I think no one in January of last year, who's perhaps other than a small group of security experts, global security experts, would have seen what was coming. But at the same time, I think there's always been this understanding that terrorists, bad state actors, whatever, could take action against, and I wonder what your opinion on the industry having sort of grappled with that, if there is sufficient diversity. So you mentioned these cases in France. Europe has a lot of path diversity, right? So it would be hard for someone to do serious damage, but I think there are some vulnerabilities perhaps that the carriers need to grapple with still.
Absolutely, you're completely right. There is, and also I would say our industry have been extremely transparent the last 15 years with information about where cables are. You can, if you buy a sea cable map, you will identify where all the sea cables are. They're in the map.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. I've got one behind me. Right?
Exactly. You're right.
Yeah.
And they're if any customers comes to us and says, we want to buy diversity from you, can you show us how you can provide diversity to us between London and Paris? We will show them the maps. And of course, sending out all these maps from every operator all the time means that everyone have access to wherever this needs. So that's something our industry needs to think about. How do we limit the sending around of maps? At the same time, if we can't send the map to a customer, how can we guarantee there is diversity? So it's a difficult question, but you're completely right that we've been a bit too transparent, and therefore the knowledge out there, if someone wants to do damage, it's fairly easy to find out where to do the most damage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly from the enterprise perspective, their wish is to have a KMZ file from every, not just their operator, but the operators that their carriers buy from, and everything on down the line, because they want to make sure if somebody digs a trench. In fact, this comes up later in your article too, but if you need physical diversity, you have to know the physical routing, but then that can be information for bad actors. So there's no clear answer, certainly. It seems to me. So yeah. So, well, carriers, good luck with that. The next thing on your 3 global carrier trends that I wanted to talk about was the greater utilization of public internet, raw bandwidth. And this is something, of course, that I've talked about a lot, from kind of more the enterprise side of the give and take of getting away from private networks and using overlays and just further up the stack to be able to just have a non-public kind of network. What did you say in the start of the year, and how do you think that played out?
The reason I wrote that was we started to see an interest from enterprise customers to really, instead of buying a very managed service where we would supply them with everything, including application performance and everything, they started to ask for pretty much raw bandwidth between A and B. That could be a wavelength, could be a very raw Ethernet service on the layer 2. And they also started to find out that through the public internet, they can probably access a lot of applications in the cloud, a lot of stuff in the cloud. And therefore, my prediction was that a lot of more enterprises were going away from asking for MPLS networks and that type of stuff. And instead just, okay, we have a big data center in Kansas. We have our headquarters in New York. Let's buy a big pipe between those two and run it ourselves. Hire the engineers on our side to run that. And then, we're going to use Salesforce and Workday and a few other applications in the cloud. Let's just buy access to the public internet and let the traffic run on the public internet. That was my prediction before. And that's really panned out during the year. And we have sold a lot of bandwidth to customers we never thought we would even engage with before. But they're coming to us saying, hey, our IT department is now so good, so we would like to buy like an operator from you. Can we buy, waves from you? Can we even buy just a lot of access to the public internet from you? So I think that one really panned out well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So even some who might be getting into peering and more carrier like activity with their own ASNs and stuff like that.
No, absolutely.
I definitely see that. One thing I have seen that's kind of a countervailing force to that. Now, you guys, of course, are a tier 1 IP backbone provider. So an enterprise customer coming to you might be coming to you for that reason. that I've seen other enterprise who shy away from the internet, having moved in that direction, then thought, well, this isn't working well because of kind of the middle mile problem, maybe because of a last mile problem. So if your endpoint, so you mentioned a case within the United States, for example, but if your office is in sub-Saharan Africa or South America in some locations, there's some folks who have turned to the internet have said, wait a minute, this isn't working great, right? So I think that the perspective maybe from a tier one backbone provider and your customer set might be missing some of those that really don't have access to great internet, even in the middle mile segment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we meet a lot of customers who comes to us and says, hey, we tried the public internet, but it didn't really work. And then obviously our job is to explain to them that the public internet is really 70,000 different networks. And if you connect to the wrong one, your traffic might take a long route through the network to wherever it needs to go. And it doesn't have the available bandwidth and everything. There's a lot of things that can happen. So I think the job we have to do as a tier one is trying to explain, how the internet backbone works. And the sooner you can get onto our network, the faster you will get to the other end and so on. So, of course, internet performance is very different among very different ISPs. So what we're trying to tell the enterprises is, try again and try to buy bandwidth from these customers, because they've in turn bought their backbone capacity from us or someone else in the tier one sector. And then that's almost a guarantee that the traffic's going to fly well through the network to the other end. But you're very right. The internet experience is very different depending on who you're using. And I would say, many are using the cost argument. It's too expensive to buy from them. Yeah, but then you get the quality you deserve. So, and it shouldn't be that much more expensive to buy from someone else.
Right. Well, that's the key, right? So, in the end, the reason for moving to the internet is in some ways a network reason. Like you mentioned, you're connecting to the cloud rather than to your having your data centers in your own premises that you have to get onto your private network or something. But also, it's mainly cost, right? So it's like MPLS is expensive, and so ostensibly you can put together an internet. So if it's not cheaper, then I don't think that calculus remains the same, right?
No,
so
absolutely.
Now, the last thing you said in your top 3 global carrier trends was looking for networks to be more open and disaggregated. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this came from the sort of chipmaggedon that we talked about before, that when the world was suddenly becoming a shortage of components, semiconductors was not available by anyone really. Then suddenly we started to see delivery times of equipment from your usual vendor that could end up in almost a year. I just heard a colleague yesterday telling me that, oh, great, I received this one is going to be delivered on the 25th of January. This is perfect. And then it's like, no, it's 2024. It's like
25th of January of some year, right?
Weeks, it's 54 weeks. So, so basically what I predicted was that more and more customers and companies need to go away from buying everything from someone and instead buying pieces from everyone and trying to put them together themselves. And I can also say that the optical industry and the IP industry have also helped us there by helping us disaggregating this. And you can now buy transponders in the optical world from pretty much anyone, and they will fit in the same sort of line box you have for your line system. And that world is now becoming almost easy to work with. It's taken a while, but now I can really start to see that, okay, transponders from these companies are being delivered in 36 weeks, but the transponders from this company is coming in 16 weeks. So let's go with them instead. And it's sort of a standard way of putting them in there. And then the other factor was, of course, this 400 gig ZR, the stuff where you would almost jump over the optical layer in between and shoot directly from a router through your optical footprint to the other end to another router. That stuff is also, when you disaggregate that and open that world, that's going to be huge for us operators, because there's a lot of pieces we don't need to buy anymore. And that's going to be a very big difference for us.
Yeah. So really you're talking at almost, if you will, the layer beneath layer one.
No,
At
absolutely. Yeah, you're right.
yeah,
You're right. We're at a very low level in the network right now, but it's sort of the
mhm,
foundation for all the services on top of
right,
it. And of course, we feel that we can produce WAN services now much cheaper and much better to customers when we have this sort of underlay in a much smarter way built.
hmm,
There is
hmm,
pointless of building networks within networks because that's the way you have to do it. If you can
hmm,
remove one of the layers here and go from the IP layer through the optical layer without any optical equipment, that's going to
right.
benefit the WANs on top of it. And there's so many things we can produce much better to enterprises today than we could yesterday.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It's something we don't hit on at telegeography very often, but actually did have a sort of equipment manufacturer on the show once talking about new ways of making like a pick card or whatever. But ultimately, what you're saying is the OEM kind of players are making a big impact on the network, but I guess carriers would have to be forward thinking, paying attention to these changes, right? So,
No, absolutely, absolutely. There's a lot of stuff happening in that world, and obviously I think the biggest struggle with us is, of course, we have the optical people in our company and we have the IP people in our company. They're
mm-hmm,
extremely good at their own platforms, but now suddenly those are merging together. And how do you operate a network where this is not given anymore, and you need to think about new ways of operating this, and that it means that we take on a lot more responsibility when we mix and match between different vendors. But it
right.
also means we have to have higher competence and get sort of a better grip of our own network, which in some way helps towards our customers because we can suddenly explain much more to customers what's going on in our network when there ever is a fault in here. But you're right, it's a
Mm-hmm.
big change for an operator like us.
Yeah, well, this was one of your other top three sections, skills gap in the carrier industry, and you mentioned IP people who understand optics, and just as you just said, there's a need for that since you can maybe skip from right plugging the optical layer right into the IP layer.
Yep.
Did that emerge? Is it what were we able to upskill some engineers in that sense, or is that something we still need to work on?
Absolutely. I would say that was a big dramatic change. I would say in the beginning of 2022, we still had these arguments between these units, and we were like, okay, who's going to drive this forward? Is it the IP people or the optical people? And I think by mid-year last year, we started to realize that it's a combination of both, actually. So
Mm-hmm.
and for the first time ever, we went to the biggest optical show in Europe uh, during summertime last year, and we had an IP guy with us.
Mm-hmm.
And we've never been there before. He had never been to an event like that. So, but it
Right.
was a good thing. And I think during the autumn, we started to see more and more that these teams they're not really speaking the same languages because in
Mm-hmm.
the IP world you do so many more software upgrades and there's a lot more
Right.
functionality. The optical world you really never touch. You install it and then let the software
Right.
be there.
It's the
Upgrade it
hardware
every
works or
second
it
year.
doesn't. Yeah.
So there's a lot they need to learn from each other. But I would say 2022 was the year when we started to see crossbreeds between these two individual groups in our company.
There's a lot of that I think going on in the industry, areas bleeding into each other that hadn't previously. But so you got one right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk about your two other skills gaps in the carrier industry. You mentioned we need finance people who understand IP. So
Yeah.
I like IP billing. Take us through what
Yeah,
the
no,
problem was.
yeah. One of the things we've found out in our companies, and I've found out from many other operators, is the way you build customers for access to internet. Obviously that's based
Hmm.
on measurement of traffic,
Right.
the traffic that flies through the network at the edge of our network and the edge of their network, sort of the traffic between the networks. And in sort of in the easiest form, it sounds super simple. You just measure the
Hmm.
traffic, and at the end of the month, you calculate when was the traffic at its peak, and that's what
Right.
you bill for.
The
But
classic
when
95%. Yeah.
exactly the
Hmm.
95th percentile, that's sort of
Hmm.
well used. But when you have a lot of ports with the customer in a lot of different time zones, and you can really make that world really complicated. And I found out last
Hmm.
year that we struggled so much with finance understanding how to bill for this,
Hmm.
and the IP people really only knowing how the traffic was flowing, but not really knowing how to transform that into pure measurements that could be explained on a bill to a customer. And I think
Right.
there is really a skills gap there in the amount of people that really understands the business side of this. We have loads of IP engineers who understands exactly how to run routers and configure them and make sure
Right.
the traffic is flying and everyone is happy. But when it comes to the measurement of the data and how to handle that and how to transform that into something that we can bill a customer and actually explain to the customer, this is your usage. And this is the way we've calculated it. That type of gap is still there. Yeah, it's still a tough area to solve.
Yeah, right. We haven't figured that one out yet. And there's also, isn't there, in some cases, I mean, kind of a geographic component, right? So we think about that a lot, telegeography, but your traffic profile incurs a lot of different costs on the backbone provider if it's traversing the world versus a country over in Europe, say.
No, absolutely. There are so many different ways you can run your traffic in an IP backbone, and you're absolutely right that some people take that for granted, but when you actually go into the details of it, it's fairly complicated, and there are many ways you can do that. So you're absolutely right.
It's one of those things where if you're talking about your job at a cocktail party with lay people, as it were, right, that the internet is a physical thing that has, like you said, 70,000 different networks, all these different, that everyone sort of, even people within the industry, sometimes even customers, kind of just imagine like, oh, I just get on the internet and that's it, right?
Yeah. No, and that's the most funny thing with the enterprises when you start to talk to the CIOs, who are usually experts on Kubernetes and the amount of servers you need to run your applications. And when you speak to them about the cloud, then it's like, the cloud is there, and we use Wi-Fi to access the cloud. What's the problem? And then not really realizing that there are really physical cables and physical data centers and a lot more stuff that can go wrong on the way to the cloud.
Yeah, well, and even just understanding that, again, the cloud is a physical thing that has to exist with costs and workers and all that, which I think we'll get to a little bit of that. But the last one in your skills gap in the carrier industry was back to optical. So you kind of probably touch on this a little bit, but optical people that understand finance. What did you mean by that?
And this was more written with sort of, I think there is a lot of optical people that understand finance, but it was more of a note to the optical suppliers that, in the IP space, there's a lot of, every time we meet an IP supplier, the feeling is that the price is going down. They've come up with 5 new inventions. That means that the price per megabit is going down. Everything is fine. While in the optical world, the sort of the decline in prices for us operators is not the same. It's not the same pace. It's not the same thing. And in my world, they're very similar. There's silicon stuff in there. There's some optical stuff in there. So it's more of a hint to the optical suppliers, please think about your pricing, because we're super dependent on that one. I fully understand they need to make money and so on. So it was more of a hint to them. Has that panned out during the year? No, it hasn't. They're still very expensive. So I missed the point there, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this. I've been involved with tracking telecom prices since 2006, and they have always gone down every single one of those years until 2022.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So on that note, you had the top 3 costs that won't go down. You started with data centers, which kind of just mentioned that there's physical real estate, people to run those, incredible security, all that sort of thing. What did you see happening in the data center space?
Unfortunately, I was very right there. It was a tough prediction. It was a simple prediction to make, and unfortunately, it became right. My feeling is these colocation companies have this. They believe they have the right to increase pricing because they know we're stuck with them. They know we have put so much time and effort into putting equipment in their data center. So they know there is no simple thing for us to say, this is enough. Let's move to the next building next door. That's going to take like a year for us to do, and it's going to cost us a fortune to do. So they can just come to us and say, hey, by the way, the price went up 25% because real estate pricing goes up. And by the way, the power also went up because power pricing goes up. And we're just stuck with that. If we would go to a customer and say, the IP pricing went up 30%, please pay more, then they would say, okay, we'll switch to someone else. That takes us 5 minutes, you're done, go home. So it was it was a prediction that was easy to make, and unfortunately it panned out to be true. Most of the co-location providers have used the fact that all the prices in the world are going up, especially on labor and pricing and real estate and whatever, and therefore they charge us more. And for a company, as you said, pricing in our world are going down every year, which means that our cost per megabit needs to go down. Then it's quite tough to sort of fight. There are not so many things we can save on. And if parts of our network cost goes up, that makes the rest of the piece even tougher to handle. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I think we saw that a little bit in the data. We haven't seen carriers really raising prices very often. It has happened in the past year, but more just along the lines of where we would expect them to have dropped prices 10 or 15%. They kept them flat, say, right? So, and that really is novel. It's something maybe you have an opinion on this. I mean, I've been seeing might eventually happen somewhere in IT is kind of the opposite of real estate, in that the reason that real estate prices go up is that there's a finite amount of land, right? It's a scarce resource.
Yep.
Bits and being able to send bits over a fiber has essentially been an infinitely growing resource. Do you see a limit to that? Is there's the Shannon limit to deal with? We're not quite there, but ultimately, it's at some point that has to stop happening, right?
Yeah, you would think so, but I think we kind of predicted that 6 years ago, and it hasn't really happened. And in some magical way, the component makers and the sort of equipment makers are coming up with ideas on how to grow the capacity all the time. And I wouldn't say there is really an end to the traffic growth. I would say last year we were a bit afraid that the traffic growth during 2022 was not going to happen, because I would say between January and August, there was no traffic growth in the public internet around the world. But then September, October, November, again, the month in the autumn were fantastic. And we're back to 25% growth for the full year of 2022. So the growth is there. I would say the equipment manufacturers are still coming out with ways of improving, probably not as good as before, because as you said, we're reaching the channel's limit. There are only ways and so many things you can do. We do have the C band, we can work with the L band, but there's not too many things. I would say Europe is perfectly fine, because in Europe we have plenty of fibers everywhere on every route. And that's not only us, that's most of the vendors that have that. While the US there's a lack of long distance fiber in the US. So that's going to be a challenge for everyone. How do we increase traffic? Like you said, it's been a given before that every year traffic increases, prices are falling. That when you only have a few fiber pairs to work with, that's going to be pretty tough in the US. So I can really see prices on the US market stabilizing right now, and maybe, as you said, maybe even go up because of the scarcity of fiber and the unavailability of buying new equipment that's 100% better than the old equipment.
Right, exactly, and again, there's that physical geography. So the one of the reasons the U.S. is a little bit behind Europe. There's other reasons. The political fracturing of Europe means more incumbent providers and all that. But it's just physical geography.
Yeah, it is.
It's expensive to dig trenches or hang wires on poles for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Right, so yeah.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Starting a new project, building a new route, that's just a major risk-taking you're doing. And it's hard to sell things before you have built them. So, there are not many companies that wants to dare to take that risk. Right,
exactly. And sometimes governments step in. There was, the Australian National Broadband Network and things like that. But even that took a very long time to come to fruition, and hasn't really materially impacted pricing in the way that I think some folks would have expected. So there's no easy answer. Yeah,
nope, you're perfectly right.
So you also mentioned in terms of costs not going down, you touched on this already, but the cost of power going up. Now, again, to emphasize to listeners, you were writing this before the Ukraine war happened.
Yeah.
So this is a place where I think your prediction ended up being unfortunately really dead on, if very conservative even, right?
Absolutely, you're perfectly right. Even though my prediction was probably lower than what actually happened, and after the war and Russia's sort of stopping serving Europe with gas and almost
Hmm.
oil as well, prices in Europe. I think the pricing in US has gone up, but it's not as dramatic
Hmm.
as in Europe. But parts of
Right.
Europe are seeing dramatic increases in power because there is simply no power to supply. And
Right.
therefore, my prediction was the power pricing was going to go up. It goes up a lot more. I've read some reports of people who sort of published their reports for 2022, and prices for power has almost doubled for some of them who's not been careful enough by sort of hedging for power pricing going forward. I think we were pretty lucky because one of our largest companies, Germany, we hedged for some pricing even before the war,
Mm.
but still that price is now 30-40% higher than it was before. I would say power is, for us, I think it's around a fifth or a sixth of our total cost. So if
Hmm.
that part goes up with 30%, there's you're in tough conditions.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe this is wishful thinking on my part, but the silver lining here might be that traditional sort of petroleum-based power sources becoming so much more expensive might, force some of the industry to move toward more renewable or alternative sources of energy. Certainly, so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a hope, and this has really, I would argue that most countries in Europe have renewed their plans and are now speeding up everything they can do around building more wind and sun and whatever that needs
Right.
to be built to sort of not be too dependent on the old way of producing power.
Yeah, yeah, but it illustrates, I think, an interesting way in which our industry is beholden to regulators and governments and forces, what wars, right, well outside of any kind of planning, or strategy that we can have within the industry, that you have to react to the rest of the world making decisions without thinking about the network,
Yeah.
right? So
No, you're
yeah.
absolutely right. Absolutely right.
And then the last cost that won't go down, I think this is one that was probably felt in almost every industry, right? But the cost of skilled people is going up, right? And seems to me that's still the case. So this is another one that I think worked out as a very accurate prediction.
Yeah, no, it really did, and the reason I wrote that was that we started, as we are breaking out from Telia, becoming our own independent company. There was a number of functions we need to replace. People that we used within Telia before that we can't use anymore. We need to have our own skilled
Mm-hmm.
people. And then when we realized, okay, here we need really skilled people, then we really understood that, oh wow, there's not too many of them on the market. Even if you go
Right.
to what's formerly known as sort of low salary countries in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
they're making a
Mm-hmm.
ton of money in these countries
Right.
as well. So it's really hard to find this. The only thing that I can think about that may change this is obviously the trend in US right now with the hyperscalers laying off a lot of people. We
Mm-hmm.
heard
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft now. We know Amazon. We know Facebook. We know a few of them have
Yeah.
have have put a lot of people on the market. They are
Mm-hmm.
probably mostly very skilled people. Uh,
Right.
we haven't seen if that's going to drop the price of labor and the cost of skilled people, but we can only hope. But I think,
Right.
when recruiting today, you need to be extremely careful selecting the right people because it's too
Mm-hmm.
expensive to find the wrong people, and finding the
Right.
right people is going to cost you. So unfortunately, I was very correct with that one, and unfortunately, we also experienced that ourselves in our company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think part of it is that even if you get a skilled person, then there's still in most of these roles a pretty steep learning curve for your particular company, and so you put that time and effort in, and then they something else comes along, and all of a sudden it's a double waste, right? You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
exactly.
So yeah, I'll say that maybe I agree. There's a glimmer of hope for a lot of technology companies in sort of the hyperscalers and downsizing and whatnot in that sense. Many of them, though, are losing fewer people than they ramped up during the sort of 2020 boom in those, obviously hyperscalers, or you think of a company like, say, Zoom, for example, right? I think went through a hiring craze, a hiring spree during 2020
Yeah.
and 21, and so some of it is sort of trimming that off. But there might be a little like hidden benefit there that you have folks getting skilled in those roles that can then go on to other places,
Yeah.
perhaps.
No, absolutely. No, we have some hope here. We
Mhm.
really have some hope here.
Excellent. All right. So before we run out of time, first I'll encourage people to go back. This was a fun article, and look out for the one coming. But could you give us a preview, perhaps, of what you are focused on for 2023?
Yeah. No. I think many of the things we saw during 2022 are the things we're going to see. I'm going to focus around security. That's going to be here as
Hmm.
well. I think one thing I'm going to write around is this sort of top three things around quality that's not network quality. I think a lot of our customers are starting to ask more questions around a lot of other stuff. Everyone wants the 99.99999 forever, but I think more and more the way we deliver circuits, the way we can repair circuits, the way we communicate with customers, the way they can interact with us through APIs and that stuff, I think those
Hmm.
things are becoming more important. That's my prediction for 2023. We need to
Hmm.
focus a lot more on that stuff. We of course need to have a network that's delivering and are not repaired all the time. But I think
Right.
there's a lot more companies asking us a lot more questions around, okay, how are you prepared when the next sabotage is going to happen? How do you
Mm-hmm.
protect your cables from not being cut underwater at the same time, 10 of them at the same time? So that type
Right.
of stuff
Hmm.
I'm going to write around in the predictions. Then there are a few other predictions as well that I hope will not happen, and some of them I really hope will happen.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
But yeah, that's sort of a
And
preview of the 2023 version.
yeah, definitely. I definitely felt a lot of these. Of course, the history. Any market doesn't unfold in neat kind of years. A lot of these things, of course, are going to continue into the next year. I wonder if you're also thinking about continuing on writing about sort of the automation trend. Maybe we wrap up with that. That's been going through the industry. Do you think? Carrier automation, so kind of on the wholesale side, is developing enough so that we can get to where we have real like enterprise automation. So like, and by that I mean specifically more bandwidth on demand and
Yeah.
provisioning circuits immediately, those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I think we are absolutely far too manual still in our industry.
Hmm.
There are stuff you can still do very well manually. So sometimes we feel, why not fix something that's not going to save us too much and it's still going to
Right.
be within. But you're very right. More automation is needed. I think the problem we have with bandwidth on demand is, of course, when you're at the scale as we are in some cases of our network, having bandwidth waiting for customers to sign is expensive.
Hmm.
And
Right.
the way we run our network, it's almost a just in time scenario where
Hmm.
someone is buying, we're installing, and then delivering to customers. Uh, of course, we would love to come to a scenario where people can buy on demand and they can turn up, turn down, change back and forth. But there's a lot of cost coming with that, and I think right now our industry is not really prepared for that. We don't dare to pre-invest and hope that the customers will come. So that's a bit of a challenge. Then obviously a lot of companies in our industry are a combination of a lot of companies they've bought over time, and having an inventory system that's a combination of 5 different inventory systems, that is hugely
Right.
difficult to
Right.
automate and find
Hmm.
out. And
Hmm.
even us who's organically grown to where we are sometimes struggle with our own inventory system, not really
Hmm.
knowing, okay, someone repaired a card over there. Where did that repaired car end up? Yeah, it's probably used somewhere else. Okay. So
Right.
from time to time, you need to go
Right.
through your whole stack of cards and so on to find out where they are. So we still have some way to go in our industry, but of course, more automation, uh, stuff where customers can fix things themselves without our interaction. That's obviously
Mm-hmm.
very well needed. We do have some APIs already for customers to do some stuff, but there's a lot more we can help them with, and I think that goes for everyone in our industry.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and that's a great point. That's kind of I've long said about just the concept of bandwidth on demand in general. That carriers don't tend to want to over provision. So you have to have that bandwidth on demand go all the way down to the original operator level, essentially, right? So only when you can automatically provision to the person who has that lit fiber, or maybe even to the point of lighting fiber that's there. Only then will it truly become that, and even at that, it's never going to happen in the last mile. Right?
No, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Well, Mattias, this has been really interesting. I thought it was like I said, a great article. I encourage everyone to read it, and you're in a great position to think about these things and pull back from the industry. I think a lot of us that work in this industry get laser beam focused on a particular few topics, and it's great to sort of be able to see how it's all working together as an ecosystem, if it will. If folks want to keep up with you, you have your own podcast. Can you tell us how to find that, and how else any listeners can keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I have my own connectivity podcast. I felt really that I met so many enterprise customers that had no clue about the connectivity world. So I felt, why not invite some people, not the top people in the industry, but the people that know something in the industry.
Right.
And really listen to them, how do they view connectivity and so on. So the Connectivity Podcast is the name. They can find it on iTunes or Spotify or wherever. I'm trying to invite interesting guests and just have a very good conversation like we've had right now around connectivity and what the trends are and sort of finding specific topics and so on. So it can be found wherever people, I think there's a handle Connectivity Podcast for people. If they want to search for it, then they should be able to find it. So thanks for that.
Excellent. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been great fun. Maybe we should do like a little standing thing. We'll check in this time next year and see how 2023
yeah, that would be fun.
If I'm still podcasting, then I hope I am. But
Okay.
Excellent.
Great.
All right. Thanks so much. Cheers. Thanks for listening. Telegeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at Telegeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com, and we'll see you on the internet.